Hello, everyone. Welcome back to AMAC's podcast, Better for America. Joining me today is AMAC's very own spokesman, Robert Charles, and he's here to speak with us about Biden's dangerous corruption and appeasement. Bobby, it is so great to have you back for the Reb and Rob show, especially at a time when there's so much happening, so many things that this administration is doing that is hurting America. And as Biden's polls plummet and Americans really lose confidence in everything that the administration is doing, we seem to be watching a perfect storm come at us. Now, Biden seems to have perfectly mismanaged the economy, foreign policy, national security, and social policy all at once. What do you make of all of this?
You know, it's interesting, Rebecca. We live in difficult times. You know, Thomas Paine was the one that said these are times that test men's souls. And I think that's the kind of times we live in today. Of course, that's what rallied your father way back to start AMAC, and he could see this kind of thing coming. Sometimes you see a storm on the horizon. And I think we're in the midst. I mean, just as a backdrop, just so people know they're not crazy, everyone is seeing what you're seeing. And I think, and certainly what I'm seeing, we have disrespect for the value of the dollar. We have disrespect for people who work hard. Their savings is getting watered down dramatically with inflation. We have disrespect for the basic working families, where more than half the country seems to think entitlement is the answer instead of both saving and working. We have disrespect for the Constitution, for truth, for accountability. On the foreign front, as you rightly point out, where do you even begin? I mean, we have a president who appears to be on the take from China, whose son clearly is gathering and has gathered millions of dollars from China. We have a president who disrespected a former president enough to violate the Fourth Amendment and to raid his home. And then, after lots of, I was going to say chest pounding, but there's not much pounding and there's not much chest. The bottom line is Biden goes out there and says, look, this is a terrible thing. He had a few classified documents. And we find out that this guy has thousands of documents in dozens of boxes in 5 different places to which his son on the take from China has access. So, and then we have an intelligence balloon squadron that seems to be deployed all over the world by China, and we pay no attention. And then they lied to us about the fact that it wasn't collecting. It was collecting. We now have potentially the largest intelligence leak. And as you know, as an intelligence officer, it's not, I spent time as an intelligence officer. It's not just about what was leaked. It's not just the fact that we're discovering that there is this dramatic online penetration that has gotten information on our sources in China, in Ukraine, and in other parts of the world. It's the fact that they're revealing the sources and methods, and it's a systemic penetration because it started in January, February, March. So what does that tell you? As an intelligence officer, it tells me this is an administration that is back on their heels. They are reckless. They are afraid of China. They are putting us at risk at the southern border. They're putting us at risk in terms of our economy. And frankly, if you really want to get down to it, they're putting our families at risk. They're making us, so that's the backdrop. And I think people, at the very least, while that's not an answer to the what can we do question, it is an answer to, am I crazy or is this really as bad as it seems? And the answer is this is pretty crazy.
Yeah, and it really does seem that everything that they're doing and touching is backfiring. Look at the toxic train derailments, inflation that is really hurting seniors, ESG that's targeting their pension plans, negatively impacting their returns, this terrible failure in Afghanistan, which none of us have forgotten. And then they seem to be so inconvenienced by our very great founding documents, the Constitution. They seem to constantly want to blame Trump and then target half of the country as domestic terrorists, especially those parents who are standing up for children. And you're right, Bobby, to point out the attack on families here in America, really trying to destroy the biological family and replace that with an ideological family. And if anyone goes against the left's new marching orders, and they're what I'm calling the left's religion, which wants us to worship government over our own values and the very values that made this country great. We see such divide in this country, such divide. We could talk all day about the people dying from drug overdoses. We know how China is impacting Mexican cartels coming over our southern border. Our free speech is attacked. Freedom to worship. Those who are law-abiding, gun-carrying citizens are under attack. We see how the Supreme Court is under attack. I mean, it goes on. And it really does help explain why Biden's polls are continuing to fall. But I think you made another really good point, and that is that, you didn't say this, but where is the accountability? Accountability matters, and elections matter, right? Elections are about the only accountability measure that we have in place, other than congressional Republicans who are really digging for truth, and honest people like yourself who are speaking out. But I just want to back up a moment, because there were so many denials made by Biden about the raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago. And the documents show that the Biden administration granted the Department of Justice special access for the raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago. Now, most Americans see this as a political circus. Bobby, as a guy who did oversight for 5 years, and you worked in the courts and in 2 White Houses, what do you make of this? And what does that really mean if Joe Biden himself gave orders to, essentially invade, or raid a former president's home?
Yeah. So the truth is, all those things that you just said are exactly right. And there's intent behind everything they're doing. Look, it's infuriating. At the minimum, it's infuriating. But the point is, in a democracy, you correct your mistakes. That's the way a representative democracy or a republic works. We are the people. The power belongs to us. It belongs to everybody listening to this broadcast. It does not belong to Joe Biden or Mr. Garland or to anybody else. It belongs to us. And so what do we do to correct this? How do we get back to accountability? That's the real question. And I just want to, as I come to Mar-a-Lago and the Fourth Amendment invasion, let me back up a step and say, if you look at history, which is the great teacher, you look at how the Bolsheviks operated in the early teens of the last century. You look at the way the fascists operated just before World War II in the early 1930s and even in the late 20s. You look at the way that communist China operates today. And what do? They make a religion out of the state. They ultimately, particularly the communists and the leftists, which is what we're up against right now, I really do believe we're up against that level of wave, and they're really trying, as they've tried a couple of times in the past, to overrun the country. What you're looking at is the way the Bolsheviks operated. They took children away from the family. In the sense that they had children reporting on their parents. They created enormous divisions. They had tried to destroy the Christian church, which went underground during that period of time. They basically, if you were looking at the blueprint for how the Bolsheviks turned what was a Christian country with central but endeared leadership upside down, they did it by doing the kinds of things we're seeing today. So now let's come to Mar-a-Lago. What was that really all about? It turns out that it was about a White House intentionally going after not only a past political opponent, but a current political opponent, and using all the powers of the government to execute either a general warrant, which we've never seen, which would have said, hey, go find whatever you can find so that we can bring charges, or a specific warrant under the Fourth Amendment, which then obviously they went out of the scope. You don't say, because you have to say absolutely everything in a specific warrant. So I'm sure they didn't say, we're going to go through the undergarments of the former First Lady. I'm sure they didn't say that, okay? But that's what they did. And they deployed for 9 hours, and they had long arms. So this is what you find in places like Bolivia, or Iran, or a third world country that's halfway between those two. This is not what we expect of America. And so ultimately, how do you get back to that? We have to do basically 3 things. We have to speak out like we're doing right now with courage. We have to beat fear and beat intimidation with personal courage. And that means going to your school board. It means getting involved in the ways in which you lobby your legislature. It means talking out to your neighbors. It means saying, you know what? You can be cowed. I'm not going to be cowed. All right. And that's the beautiful thing that is happening in a lot of this country. It also means you have to prepare for electoral disruption in 2024. And we have to be ready to combat that, because that's the self-correcting mechanism. And the last thing we have to do is, even in this current moment, I think we have to look at ways that a good prosecutor could actually force, in addition to Congress forcing impeachments, a good prosecutor forcing prosecution of prosecutors and prosecution of politicians that are unaccountable. You know, the only thing that keeps us going forward is the collective respect for rule of law. If
That's
we lose,
exactly right.
if we
Yeah.
lose that, Rebecca, we lose everything.
Yeah. I mean, it's shocking that we've got Mayorkas, who's clearly not doing his job, Joe Biden, who's completely ignoring his promise that he made to the American people by just keeping wide open borders, putting Americans at risk. And then you see these, I just saw a report where we've got the FBI, an FBI agent sent out to spy essentially on Catholic patrons, people that are attending Catholic Mass. This just seems all so wrong. And when it smells bad
You
and
know,
looks bad and sounds bad, it's usually bad.
yes, it is. And Rebecca, do you know that when I read that, it sent a shiver through me, because that is exactly what the Bolsheviks did. They
Yeah.
penetrated the Christian churches and then caused the churchgoers to be afraid of going to church, and caused them to be turned in the same way this Justice Department is intimidating people, arresting those that protest peacefully against abortion, and then either truly prosecuting them for something they have a First Amendment right to, and by the way, they're using their moral compass, or on the reverse side, not prosecuting them, but chilling them, causing them to be afraid. We cannot be afraid. If there is one thing out of this podcast I want people to come away with today, it is: do not allow fear to govern your day. We are, every one of us, courageous when we want to be. When we have to be and when we want to be, we are. But you have to say, this is one of those times when I am not going to sit down, shut up, and let you roll over me. I'm going to tell you that I'm going to go to church, and if I find out that the FBI is violating my First Amendment rights, I'm going to work with litigators and potentially good prosecutors and go after the people doing that, because that's the only way you keep the system honest.
I think what's really frustrating to our members is that the mainstream media is completely covering up the corruption that we see coming right from the Biden family. It is shocking that the biggest story, I think, of our lifetime as it relates to any sitting president has been largely ignored. So, Bobby, I want to get to that in a few moments, but you mentioned just a few minutes ago the Chinese threat. And I wanted you to talk with us a little bit about the recent intelligence leak, because I don't know what to expect. I know that you've been there. We're losing big. We're losing our future to China, essentially.
Yeah.
How do we stop this horrible slide?
Yep. Well, I will tell you that it's like any problem that anybody listening or watching has in their own life, and the same thing happens at the international level. It's hard to believe that, but having been an assistant secretary with Powell and having been naval intelligence for 10 years, the same principles apply at the higher level. So what does that mean? If you're reckless or careless, people are going to take advantage of you. If you deny that you have a problem, if you keep calling somebody like China just a peer competitor, they're not a peer competitor. Okay, they're an adversary that want to take the place of America in the world. And so when you allow China, which happened last week, this really, I think, very inept administration, inept Secretary of Defense, inept Secretary of State, even if they're not fellow travelers, they're kind of naive in their views of what the opponent is looking to do to you in the ring. They're not coming in to have tea. They're coming in to take you out. Okay. And so that's what China, last week, China went around to our allies and has begun to convince them to abandon Taiwan. Well, where are you in this mix? Why are you out there with a forceful 10-minute press conference saying, we will never let that happen? And I, by the way, Biden ought to be saying, I, by the way, am going to put a second carrier battle group in the immediate vicinity of Taiwan so that Taiwan knows we have their back. So does Australia. So does France, that just walked away from them. So does the rest of the world. And by the way, we not only have their backs, we have the back of every one of our allies. And by the way, we're strong in defense. We're not going to let you walk all over the treaty obligations. So, it really is the same principle. You first have to accept that you have a problem. You can't deny that this is what they're doing. And then you have to directly confront it. And hopefully what you do in that process, which Ronald Reagan did expertly, Theodore Roosevelt did expertly, was you deter the bad guy from doing the thing that he thought he had a chance to do. You say, the perceptions of us being weak are wrong. Okay. And if you step over this line, it'll be the last time you step over this line. We're going to come down. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to come down. Now, this is what we expect to hear from our president, from the leader,
That's
our
right.
leader. But could the big guy be in bed with the bad guy? And,
Yeah.
why isn't, and this is really brings me back to Biden's corruption, why isn't Biden stepping up, boldly speaking to the American people with a real strategic plan to ensure that we don't lose our future to China? And one can't help but think that that he is protecting in some way, somehow, that relationship, or is compromised. Can you share with our listeners what you know about the Biden family, their dealings with China, and how that might compromise his work going forward to protect America?
People don't like, Rebecca, people don't like, all of us, we don't like to think that it is as bad as it is. We don't really like to contemplate the idea that a president of the United States may not be mentally with it, which he clearly is not, and then may have consciously or indirectly allowed his son and wider family to profit, perhaps even himself to profit from, as you say, being this close to an adversary that is clearly after our position in the world and is clearly encouraging corruption. I mean, what this boils down to is a violation of the federal bribery statutes. So, I mean, the answer, so from the broad picture, the answer is that what you're seeing it is, I think, as bad as what we think it is. And the documents that are being produced by the limited documents that we're able to get, the Republicans were able to get out of the Treasury Department, out of the Justice Department, out of the White House, as they still try, they're still trying to suppress subpoenas. They're still trying to avoid oversight. But even the documents that Jordan and Comey and others are getting, indicate that everything we suspect is actually happening, that there is money being transferred by the Chinese into the bank accounts of unqualified members of the Biden family, who in turn may be transferring some of that money to the big guy, which is, of course, a reference to the email in which they imply that Biden is going to be a recipient of the dollars that are coming out of communist China. In terms of the intelligence leak, I just want to also say it's a very serious ongoing problem, as are the classified documents. And the media wants us to forget these. They want them to be one-day wonders. They want them to be front page today, maybe, get it out of the way and then sweep it under the rug and don't talk about it again. Well, we have to keep talking about it, because a systematic intelligence penetration means we have spies in the middle of the operation. A systematic approach to destroying the education system and trying to steal the hearts and minds of our kids, that's a serious ongoing problem. The idea that you're going to prosecute people for exercising basic constitutional rights, that is a serious ongoing problem. And the fact that we have a president who is patently, objectively, empirically acting like a crook, acting like a guy whose family is taking money from a foreign government and not addressing it. If you're not a crook, then get up there and say it. Lay out the data, do the Ross Perot charts and tell me why all the other things that seem to imply that you're culpable, that you should at least be put under the magnifying glass, why we're wrong about that. If, as you said a minute ago, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And if it walks and talks like someone who is aligned with China, instead of defending to the end the interests of the United States in terms of our economy, our dollar not giving way to the yuan as the reserve currency of the world, if you really believe all that, then get out there and fight for it. And that's not what we're hearing.
That's right. And so many moderate Democrats are now leaving the Democrat Party. It is so transparent that the Biden administration and all of those who are giving him marching orders are really against so many of the important values, the principles that make this country great. You're a parent, I'm a parent, and America has some 63 million parents with children at home. And the assault on parents, Bobby, is so disturbing. It's happening alongside an attack on common sense definitions of boys and girls. And the idea seems to really rip away the innocence of America's children. This is something I'm so passionate about and for. If there's one thing I want to make sure is that my children, my grandchildren, live in a world that is still free. Are there any historical precedents for this? What should we do? I mean,
Yeah.
how do you see this today? You've been around, you've seen a lot, but this
Yeah.
is something all new. The
Yeah.
attack on families and parents specifically.
You're absolutely right. And so two thoughts come to mind when you say that. The first is this is how the communists operated. And it is also, by the way the Nazis operated. They, in the early 30s, when they were the brown shirts and earlier on, they tried to basically get into the minds of the young people and distort those minds. It's actually the way the Imperial Japanese operated as well. They try to take the children, and by taking the hearts and minds of the children, getting them to turn on their parents, turn on the values that they were raised with, you create essentially the churn at the bottom or at the beginning of the process that in turn allows them to later take advantage of that. In the communist world, they would use a group called Komsomol, which was for the young people, and they would get in there and try to infect their thinking. You could call it radicalization, but I would call it slow motion radicalization, although frankly, they're going like a freight train now. But the idea is to cause the children who are in a state of high impressionability to doubt the values that actually have created the society that the left wants to take over. And then, the other thing that comes to my mind, and I often wonder if there isn't a link between communism and in this particular chapter of Plato's Republic, there is a chapter in Plato's Republic which people probably don't really think about much, but it's significant because what it says is that he in a sort of a I don't know. It's a very philosophical book. It's not talking about something that actually happened. But the idea is that maybe the state can do a better job of raising the child who belongs to the parent. And the parent is, not only bore the child and is raising the child, loves the child, has the real commitment to the child, but maybe the state can sweep in and just take the children out. It's sort of a Pied Piper mental attitude toward it all. And of course, Plato was wrong about that. He was right about a lot of things about how a republic operates, but he was definitely wrong about that. But you look at the way, Rebecca, that the left is infiltrating, these teachers' unions, the way they're intimidating teachers into causing children who are little teeny children to lose their innocence and forget whether they're a boy or a girl, or actually be taught that they're a girl if they're a boy. And then you see things like this latest news story about the pumping hormones and that into children without the parent even knowing. And then when the parents speak up at a school board meeting, or the grandparents do, and grandparents are a tremendously powerful force. When they speak up, the Justice Department tries to intimidate them. I find all of this really not just disheartening, but anti-American and really a disgusting turn of events that needs to be reversed.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a shame. It's sad. It's sad for me to have to admit the truth that we have a president who's for late-term abortion right up until birth, a president who is for destroying female sports, women's sports, a president who is for wide-open borders and more fentanyl poisoning across this nation, a president who is just weak on the world stage, one that cannot be trusted. So we do hope and pray for the future of America. We are relying very heavily on accountability through free and fair elections. And so we'll be tracking things as we go along. But before we let you run, Bobby, I have a last thought. You've worked for people like Ronald Reagan and Colin Powell. These were principled men with great courage. Bobby, from where do you draw your strength, the determination for you to dig in, to search for truth, to fight back against the radical left, and for the courage to speak out on so many important issues?
I guess I would say, Rebecca, and perhaps you're like this too, and many of those people watching are. I think I draw it from two or three basic life patterns. One is I am a person of faith. I believe in a loving God who also expects us to do our part when we can. I believe that what He wants of us is that we should not only live our lives in a way that respects what we're expected to respect, but at the same time that we are equal to our time, that we step up. So my faith, I would say, is part of it. A second piece of it is the love of children, the love of family, and you say to yourself, if no greater good can a man. I'm not going to say it exactly right, but there is no greater good than laying down your life for another, and that can never be more significant than a parent for a child. It is, we owe it to ourselves, to our children, and as you say, to the future, to draw strength from the obligation we have to our children and our grandchildren. And then last, I draw a lot of, at least instruction, if not inspiration, from the World War II generation who went through such hell in order to give us what we have, those who lived through the real depression in 29 and beyond. Those that have fought in all of our wars. I strongly encourage people to just take your children on a walk, or your grandchildren on a walk through a cemetery, and point out, particularly a military cemetery like Arlington. If you come to Washington, don't miss Arlington. Walk through that cemetery so that people can understand. I walked through there yesterday, and at the Korean War Memorial, there is a big wall, and it has thousands and thousands of names on it, like the Vietnam Memorial Wall. But there's also a big slab of granite, and on the granite in big letters, it says, "Freedom is not free." And this is where we have to draw our own strength. When we face fear on a personal level, on a national level, we have to say, remember all those who had the courage to deliver us here. And we need to be equal to what they have done for us, and ask God's help in getting there.
Thank you so much for joining, and look forward to having you back with us again soon, Bobby.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and everybody.